Hello, and welcome to Begin Together, a podcast for individuals and couples who are healing from infidelity and other forms of deceptive sexuality trauma. I am your host, Janae Lindsay, and today I am so excited. Joining us from across the pond is Chris Jones. So happy he's here. I'm going to just go ahead and read a little bio to introduce you to him. Chris Jones is a UK-based therapeutic counselor, certified coach, and deceptive sexuality trauma therapist. He is the founder of Chris Jones Therapy and creator of From Harm to Healing, a structured online group program for men who have engaged in deceptive sexuality based on the DST model developed by Dr. Omar Minwalla. His work focuses primarily on the harmful relational dynamics that can accompany sexual betrayal and deception, and the traumatic impact these behaviors can have on intimate partners and wider family systems when a hidden sexual reality is exposed. Chris also hosts the From Harm to Healing podcast, where he explores the DST model in greater depth, examines blind spots within traditional approaches to compulsive sexual behavior and sex addiction, and seeks to bring greater clarity to the experiences of those who have been impacted by this kind of relational harm. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just so happy to see you. For those of you who, of course, would not know, Chris and I actually trained together, and we were in the same cohorts together when we trained with Dr. Omar Minwalla on his model of deceptive sexuality trauma therapy training. So, Chris, I would love to know, I don't actually think I know this about you, but how did you find out about Dr. Minwalla and what got you interested in learning about his model? Can you share some of that?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It is great to be here, and following on from what you said, on my own podcast, a few of the episodes I've done are with other people who were in our training cohort. And it was an interesting thing that we ended up being in a very small, quite intimate cohort, training directly with Omar, with Trish. And so this kind of training as well, I think naturally it challenges you. It brings a lot up. It is a very intimate, very kind of raw process. It's more than just an intellectual model. And so I think you naturally build quite close relationships with the people in those cohorts. And I know you and I haven't actually spoken for quite some time. So it was when you invited me on the podcast, it was, yeah, sure, definitely, no problem. I'll come on, even if it's just to have a nice chat. So it is great to see you again and have the time together. In terms of how I came to do the training or came across Omar, I'll give the short version of a very long story, but it sort of comes initially out of my own recovery journey. And then let me think of the order of how it went. So it came through my own recovery journey, and part of that entailed an organization in the UK that I did some work with, and then ended up doing some coaching for that organization, and decided really as part of the new direction my life was going in to train as a therapist. And so I was doing some coaching in this kind of area generally, whilst also training alongside as a therapeutic counselor. And then through that organization, I got linked to Marnie Breaker at Helping Couples Heal.
Yeah.
And Dwayne Osterlind at the time. And so then I started doing some coaching for them. And then pretty early on in my time there, in one of the sort of weekly, what would you call it? We had the weekly sort of training calls together for the staff in Helping Couples Heal. We were introduced to this guy called Omar Minwalla, who had this model and was doing this new training program. And so really just through, I would say, lots of luck, or however you would want to frame that, but just through those sliding doors moments, I sort of met this person who introduced me to this person, and then this happened. So I ended up having had no interaction with the model beforehand whatsoever, within a month or two of really getting into that, being in the first ever training program that Omar did. And so I went in kind of blind, but just as soon as I heard him describing his approach, it instantly made sense to me, both from my own personal journey, but professionally, it just made so much sense of what I was seeing, what I'd experienced in a much fuller sense than a lot of the kind of traditional models that one might work with. So I think hopefully that answers your
Yeah,
question.
no, it really does. Thank you so much for sharing that part. It's funny how you said like by luck, really, like it feels lucky. And also, I think about Dr. Manwala says a lot that it's also a hornet's nest, right? Like doing this kind of work, deceptive sexuality trauma treatment, whether it's through educating about it or sharing your voice around it or actually in the treatment room with clients, it really can be like a hornet's nest. So there's this gift of having this knowledge and this information and being able to share it. And then there's also, I think, this responsibility for sure that comes with it. And also, a lot of people can have really big, understandable feelings when you're talking about abuse and trauma and the kind of abuse and trauma that's very specifically connected with deceptive sexual behaviors, right? So yeah, I feel it's very similarly like so lucky and so grateful to have access to this knowledge and information. And then also sometimes like, oh, it's a lot to have this access to the knowledge and the information and that responsibility to do something with it, right?
I think one of the beauties for me is, I think it's sort of intrinsic in what I just said in my own journey, that I started with a personal journey and
Sure.
then came into it. And again, by luck or however you want to frame that, the treatment approach that I was introduced to was very much partner sensitivity,
Sure.
betrayal, trauma informed, that kind of thing. So it's not like I started in a different realm and then had to be introduced to these ideas. So for me, from the start, I didn't realize it was controversial. It was just like, oh, this is it. It's
Totally.
trauma. It's abusive to withhold a reality from someone, to gaslight, to manipulate someone.
Mhm.
Cool. We can all agree and move forward, and it'll be great. And then you realize, oh, this is actually this really controversial thing, and it's a hornet's nest and all
Yeah.
of that. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of lucky in that, professionally speaking, I'm pretty much a nobody. As
Sure.
in, I'm not in any big organizations. I'm not affiliated to anything. I just came in and happened to stumble across this DST model, trained in it, and then everything I do circles around that. So I might regret saying this, but I don't really get attacked or criticized too much, or at least not that I hear. Maybe I do all over the place and I just don't see it. But yeah, I'm lucky enough to be, if you kind of get what I mean by that, a sort of nobody professionally that's just doing my own thing.
Totally.
And, Omar sometimes says, you've got to find your twirl.
You gotta
And
find your twirl.
I guess we found our twirl in
We
this.
found our twirl. Yeah, we're on our little hilltops and we're doing our twirl, right? So, Chris, I think most people who are listening into this podcast are pretty familiar with the idea of the basement, the secret sexual basement. But I would really love if you would share, if you would maybe kind of walk us through that metaphor of the basement and teach that. I think it's so helpful to hear that from somebody else's voice, and just would love to hear you share that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the beauties of the DST model, part of, I think, the incredible thing Omar was able to build is based on metaphor. And I remember him saying that he had all the concepts, the clinical language and clinical ideas, but it wasn't until he came up with this idea of the basement that it kind of clicked into place and really started connecting with people. So I think the metaphor of the basement, if we kind of zoom out a bit and you're picturing a family home and everything looks normal from the outside. I think that's the key thing. It's a couple of cars on the driveway. You can see the family inside, eating dinner, doing chores, rushing around, doing what families do. All looks normal from the outside. But underneath the home, there's this secret sexual basement that only one of the people in the home actually knows about. So we'll generally assume, certainly in the lens I work through, that that's the man, the husband in the home. And so there's this idea that the partner, the kids, the family system are existing in this one reality, in this home. That's what they know about. That's what they see. But secretly, there's this other part underneath that only he knows about. He can go down there, act out in various ways, do things that are against the fidelity agreement of the relationship, whatever that might be, but doing it in secret and then coming up closing the trapdoor, rolling the rug back over it, hiding it again. And so he is living in one reality where there's the home and the basement underneath. The partner, the family system, are living in a manipulated reality where they only know part of it. They don't really know what's going on. But then to extend the metaphor further, it's this idea that real harm is occurring when that system is in place, because we can think of it like the fumes from the basement. No matter how much he's locking it down and hiding it away, the fumes are escaping. The fumes are coming up into the home above and poisoning, harming the people in the home. And then this so often culminates with the discovery of the basement. And then we have this almost acute, painful impact of the home collapsing, falling into the basement underneath. So it's a metaphor that really highlights the harm that's being caused, which is so critical to name the harm that's occurred to people who have so often suffered in silence and actually not been illuminated, not been honored in what they've suffered. But it's also really a way of highlighting the two-part problem of deceptive sexuality, that it is about the sexual behaviors that are occurring inside the basement that go against the fidelity agreement of the relationship. But it's also about all of those behaviors that are used to hide the basement from the family above. And so we'd be thinking about things like lying by omission, gaslighting, hiding evidence, deleting browser histories, hiding transactions, all of those kind of things that keep those two realities separate, the basement and the home above. So I think that kind of covers the core of the metaphor that I think resonates so well with so many people who have lived this kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that and just describing it, because I think you can't not hear that metaphor and feel the impact of that, the impact of the basement and the reality upstairs colliding into each other. And I know Dr. Manwala talks about that as this literal car crash where the pre-existing reality, everything that you believed was true upstairs, literally comes crashing into the basement, and the injuries are so significant and so severe. And as you were sharing, one of the things that popped into my mind, I think about, it's so clear. It's like gaslighting, manipulating somebody's reality, lying by omission, maybe lacking empathy, lacking remorse, victim blaming, whatever justification you had to do to keep that basement there and to believe that it was sort of okay, quote unquote, okay to have that. We can name all of those behaviors, list them all out. And of course it is emotional abuse. And of course, there are these injuries that happen because of somebody's lack of integrity, right? And yet, so often I think when abuse is actually named, there can be this really strong resistance to that word. This like, oh, you're shaming me by saying that I've been abusive or something. And I always think there's such a difference between shaming somebody versus somebody feeling shame because they're being held accountable versus just the pain of confronting this kind of reality. But can you share, maybe, Chris, some of your thoughts on naming abuse and not doing that in a shaming way?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a human reaction, right, to hear some of these words and to have discomfort or defenses to come up, to want to pull away. And we know, as I said naively at the start, I didn't realize this was particularly controversial. And then you realize this is the hornet's nest right there, is naming the abuse. So I think, like you said, the abuse element, if it's laid out correctly, I think it's actually quite clear.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think it's cognitively difficult to accept.
Yeah.
Because it's the idea that if you are manipulating somebody's reality and if you are withholding important parts of their reality from them, they cannot make a fully informed decision. So if I'm married to my wife and she is investing in the relationship based on the understanding that there is a certain fidelity agreement and I am not following that, she may well leave me for not following that. So if I'm hiding it from her, I'm taking away her ability to make that informed decision.
Yeah.
So I am disempowering her by taking away her ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I'm covertly controlling her. I'm controlling her reality, her ability to decide what she would want to do with her life if she had the information available. So again, I think you can lay it out in a way that I think that's pretty inarguable, that that's just the fact of what is happening with deceptive sexuality. The problem is we associate the word abuse or abuser with something we might see in a movie or like a
Yeah.
stereotypical portrayals of what abuse looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I think of abuse through the lens of harm and disempowerment or power differential. If there's
Mm-hmm.
a power differential that is leading to harm, then we very, very likely have abuse occurring. And so it can happen in what might seem to be these more subtle ways. It's not someone physically abusing or sexually abusing someone, or it's not a violent act in the sense of traditional understanding of violence. So I think in my experience with guys, maybe when they first hear it, yes, they can experience it as almost like an insult, like a shaming statement. But my experience over and over is that if you communicate it in that way, if you explain why this isn't about insulting you, this isn't about criticizing you, this is about naming a reality that is present. And these are the reasons we use this word. This is why there's a power differential. This is why we consider it abuse.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, I actually find a lot of guys really resonate with that. And it doesn't mean it's not really uncomfortable, but they resonate with this sense that actually, now that I hear it and see it like that, I can understand my partner's reactions more. I can see that that is what's happened. That is what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it can actually have the effect of reducing those defenses in a
Yeah.
sense. And then that becomes the work, really, learning to sit with that label, learning to understand it. And that idea that until you can name something, you can't really deal with it. So when we're naming that, what we call the abuse victim trauma reality, this is what the partner has experienced. I can't really attend and provide safety and healing conditions and all the things I need to for my partner if I can't even sit with the word, if that's what she has experienced. So yeah, I think to me the key is laying it out in that methodical way. So it's not an insult, it's a statement of what has occurred that we can look at. And if the person doesn't agree, there's not much I can do about that. You lay the information out and it's up to them what they do with it.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. It's if we can't name it, how can we heal from it? If we can't name it and then turn towards it and then be able to metabolize it, you first have to be able to name that as a reality. And I always come back to, I think I remember Trish saying this, but just truth heals. Truth is inherently healing, even really hard truths. But I also think, would you rather be accurate and have truth, or would you rather kind of stay comfortable? Because these aren't comfortable truths. They're painful, scary, heavy truths, and they take a lot of courage, to move through and navigate and to turn towards it. And the other metaphor that I really resonate with is if I went to the doctor and I had cancer, I I need the doctor to tell me that I have cancer, not just to say you're sick.
Yeah.
I don't I don't want my couples therapist telling me that we have a communication problem when there's actually an abuse problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I need my doctor to have the courage to name the really hard, scary reality, and then it is my role to take that diagnosis of cancer and, okay, what's the treatment plan here? What am I going to do to try to heal this? And of course, that requires so much humility and willingness, all of that, accountability in the case of somebody who has a basement for sure. But yeah, I'm like, no, as therapists or a coach or an educator in any way, it's so important to be inaccurate realities, even when those realities are painful to name and scary to name.
Yeah, I think especially when they're painful things to name. So when we do the men's groups that I run, looking at this kind of material, doing this work, we always talk about two key principles that I think for a lot of men doing this are areas of deficit that need to become areas of strength. So we talk about self-contact or intimacy with the self, and then using the voice authentically. And we talk about this idea that fundamentally the patterns of harm we're talking about, so many of them linked to the voice, it's about using the voice as a tool of manipulating reality or creating manipulated reality, the ways I lie, the ways I gaslight, and so on. Whereas healing comes when we're using the voice as a tool of accuracy and authenticity. So I'm using the voice to tell the truth. And I'm also using my voice to express who I really am, the internal stuff. And to be able to do that, I always think it's funny. You say to guys, you need to start being authentic about who you are. And then you realize, wait a minute, who am I? I don't actually know who that is. And so there's this whole thing about looking inside and then linking it back to this point. It's the idea, if you can't really name the truth, you're almost manipulating yourself. You're still looking at this. You're looking at the light parts in yourself and not willing to look at the dark. You're looking at the light, not the shadow. And so I often talk about when it comes to self-contact, when it comes to using the voice, voicing up, the truth is often extremely uncomfortable, but it's always empowering. If we think about propaganda and manipulation on a sort of bigger scale in the news, in media, in politics and things, we're always ultimately disempowered when our reality is manipulated, even if it's a comfortable manipulation. And some of the most uncomfortable things are the very things that need to be voiced. So yeah, I'm always trying to encourage the guys, don't fall into the trap of thinking that everything you say should be comfortable or shouldn't cause any difficult emotions in your partner. On the contrary, hiding stuff is what's got you here. You need to learn to do it in a very caring, safe way, but you need to learn to be fundamentally honest. But again, to the point we're saying, you first need to be honest with yourself. So if it's abuse, you need to be able to name the abuse.
Yeah. Amen. Absolutely. Yes. And that self-contact part, it's so much easier said than done to really actually have that radical honesty first and foremost with yourself. Because if you've had the capacity to maintain a basement, you have also had all of the justifications, rationalizations, and self-deception in order to make that okay, in order to live out of alignment actually with your true integrity. And so being able to actually look inward, and I love what you said, really integrating the light and the dark. We have to be able to look at both. None of us are all light. Not a single one of us, We've got to be able to integrate that.
Yeah.
And it's hard. But I love Dr. Manwala talks about 3 main principles and concepts and really characteristics that you can work on during your treatment process, because these are where the injuries are. But with integrity, so you have an integrity problem, you have an intimacy problem, and you have an integration problem. And so healing and treatment is working on that integrity and becoming that person with integrity, becoming that fully integrated person, and then having that true intimacy, which really starts with that self-contact that you're naming.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we all do it to some degree. We're comfortable with the light parts of ourselves. We're not comfortable with the shadow, the idea of shadow integration. So I think we're all on a journey with that, right? But if you're a guy who's walking this path, who has betrayed your partner, who has built a secret sexual basement, who has caused this tremendous traumatic impact on your partner, you're also in a position where you're going to have your shadow reflected to you frequently and very with a lot of emotion attached to it. You are living with the repercussions of your shadow, of the harm that you've caused. I often say to the guys I work with, you can think of it like the reason attending to this kind of trauma is so hard for so many men. It's like your partner, every time she's triggered, every time that emotion's coming up, it's like she's holding a mirror up to you that's reflecting all the parts of yourself and what you did that you don't want to see. And so if you have not integrated that story, and like back to our point, if you can't name the abuse, well, your partner's going to make it very clear to you through her pain, through the impacts on her, the abuse that you caused. So if you can't name it, you're going to shut down. You're going to become defensive. You're going to try and correct her. You're going to stonewall. You're going to leave the room. You're going to do all these things that exacerbate the pain rather than create those conditions where healing can happen. So the integration piece, I mean, they're all the integrity, intimacy, integration. I always think, yeah, this is the one, but then it's
Yeah.
like, well, no, you need that as well. So yeah, all three of those provide a real, I think, great vision, if you like, of what it is to move forward. That is so much grander than just stop acting out. Like,
Yes.
yes, that's important, but there's
Yes.
this huge positive vision moving forward of what it is to be a healthy man, what it is to be a healthy human being. So yeah, love the three eyes.
Totally. There's a difference between stopping the bleeding versus like actually healing and doing that deeper healing. I love that metaphor of the mirror that you shared, because I think that really also requires so much of that willingness and that humility to even open your eyes and be willing to look into the mirror, to be willing to see. Because I think so often what happens is like somebody holds up the mirror and it's like, oh, I'm gonna close my eyes. I don't want to look at that. No thanks, but having that willingness and that humility to go, okay, I'm gonna do this. And if you're the treatment professional working on holding up the mirror, it's really providing that adequate safety so that somebody can look, and that it's safe to do this. And there's a lot of honoring somebody who has that willingness to look and the willingness to turn towards these kind of realities. I'm sure you feel that all the time with these men that you're working with, right? How humbling is it, right? As the treatment professional or the coach, or, to just walk with people who really have that humility and that willingness.
And to see the healing that is possible.
Mm.
We don't know, not every relationship can heal, and we're not in control of that, but everybody involved can work towards safety and can work towards healing, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
And I think that the problem we have is when we can't integrate that shadow, when we can't sit with the partner's pain, the partner's distress, you just get these dynamics over and over in the relationship where the trigger comes up, the pain comes up, some of the distressing material comes out. And then because he can't hold it, he gets dysregulated, responds in all the various ways we're talking about. And then more negative emotion for both people is attached to that distressing material. Then it's pushed back inside, ready to come out again the next time with more energy attached to it.
Yeah.
So no healing is happening. In fact, complex trauma is occurring. It's probably getting worse in some ways.
Oh.
And you see those moments then, especially if you're doing things like you'll be familiar with going through the room work, the 22 rooms, when you're doing some of that deeper work with couples, you'll see the power of what can happen when she can bring that distressing material out and he can sit and hold it with her. And sometimes it means saying nothing. Sometimes it means just eye contact, just
Yes.
body
Yes.
posture, all of those things. When he can just sit with it, he doesn't need to correct it. He doesn't need to find the holes in what she's saying.
Mm.
He doesn't need to insert himself into the conversation or justify anything. You see the power. It doesn't make the pain go away,
Mhm.
but rather than adding negative emotions and pushing it in, it's processed, it's metabolized. Talk
Mhm.
about it. Light is shone on that issue and it gets put back in an integrated way rather than suppressed again. So it is the most beautiful thing, and it's a really hard place to get to that, but it's the most beautiful thing when you see it happening. And as you said, very humbling as a professional. And it's in those moments you think, I'm not even doing anything. I'm just sat here watching these two beautiful human beings working through this really difficult stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very humbling experience.
Yeah. And I think, for somebody maybe listening in on this, if you're not in that place yet, which would make sense, is a really important just first step is maybe even noticing what happens for me when my emotions are activated, what defenses show up for me, because we can do so much learning just by noticing our emotions and noticing our defenses, and it gives us so much more power to choose moving forward. Okay, how do I want to practice responding when this emotion does show up, when this is activated? Because it's going to be. If you're the person who has betrayed in your marriage, in your relationship, your partner is very likely going to activate your emotions a lot. So you're going to have a lot of opportunities actually to respond with safety, but you're going to have a lot of opportunities to practice noticing what those defenses are. And then it's like the minute we can start noticing our defenses is the minute that we have some power and some agency to choose to show up different. I truly believe that. If we can notice them, then we have choice instantly. It's like instant choice, and not saying that's easy. It's not, right? But I think that's a really good place to start before you can even come into the room with somebody and, okay, we're looking at this together, and I'm going to take accountability here, and I'm going to have that humility, right? So noticing emotions, noticing defenses, I feel like, that's good practice for everybody, whether or not a basement exists, just good life work. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking you must have read my material. You're just describing like what I go through with guys almost exactly. Because one of the things, right, we do that introduction part where we talk about creating what we call extraordinary space, slowing down, taking a breath. And part of that, like I said, self-contact, using the voice. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? And I always make that point, which you've just illustrated beautifully, that we're not doing anything wrong when these emotions come up or we feel those defenses come up. We're being human. Human beings have defenses. And when we approach distressing material, it is human to have defenses. The problem is when we're not aware of them. And so I'm really just repeating what you said to try and sound clever.
That's
But
perfect. Yes.
the problem is when we're not aware of it, the defense is still there. The emotion is still there inside us, but we're just reacting to it. It's just coming out of us. It's coming out in our body language, in my tone, in my voice, everything. The moment you can actually notice it, like, there's that thing that I do, or there's that feeling that comes up, or I'm noticing this tension in my body, or I'm noticing a really strong desire to leave the room or to push back or whatever it is. In that moment, you're not doing anything wrong yet. You're just being human. And as you said, that is the moment where change happens. Therapy doesn't get rid of our emotions and our defenses and all of that. It helps us actually become illuminated to them so we can choose a different path. So as I said, all I've done there is just repeat exactly what you said. But it's such an important point.
That's great. It's like we were trained by the same person, Chris.
I know, right?
Like
Crazy.
Crazy. Can I flow back to something? This is so gonna feel, I don't know, maybe disjointed, but it just popped into my brain. Back to our basement when you were sharing the reality upstairs and the reality in the basement, but that she is living in this manipulated reality. She's living in this intentionally manipulated reality. He knows what both of those realities look like. And that just one of the things that's really come up some in my community recently has been that question of, was any of it real? Because when those two realities do come crashing into each other, it's like you don't even know your spouse anymore. It's like, what is this? What have I been living in? It alters everything. Dr. Manwala talks about like the ink and water, it's like here's my memories, this clear water, and now when the realities come crashing into each other, it has altered everything. The water is completely different. It's now, black or whatever color. But that question, was any of it real? I think sometimes people want to oversimplify it with like, no, none of it was or something. And then I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. And I know we can't give like a blanket statement for everybody. That's not helpful or ever going to work. Like we can't actually do that. We don't know everybody's situations, who's listening, but I would just love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it's really hard, isn't it? Because it comes up a lot in the clinical work where,
Mhm.
really common response, common sort of trauma impact for a partner is, I can't look at photos of our wedding day
Yes.
anymore. Those vacations we went on,
Yes.
those things we did, because that's kind of been shattered. Whereas the guy's thinking, well, but no, that was still our wedding day. That was still a wonderful thing. That was still a positive vacation. That was still a happy time we had. So this isn't just a hypothetical question, right? It's a very practical question that
Right.
people are wrestling with. I think it comes down to that idea of living in the two realities again, because for the partner, well, no, let's start with the guy. So for the guy who has built and maintained the secret sexual basement, as you said, he knew he was doing that the whole time. So his reality is, I got married and had that beautiful wedding day, and I acted out after that and before that. Like, I
Mhm.
already know that. I've metabolized that reality.
Mhm.
So that wedding day was still my wedding day. That's still a beautiful day for me. That vacation I went on and then I secretly acted out during or after that vacation, I knew that. So it was still a great vacation. So in many ways, and even saying this now, it's not quite this simple, because the reality fracturing occurs for the guy as well to a degree. But let's
Yeah.
just say, generally speaking, um, his reality isn't fundamentally changed by
Mhm.
the discovery, because
Mhm.
what's being discovered was already all there in his reality.
Yes.
He might have been in denial about it and so on. Whereas for the partner, when she looks at those wedding pictures, when she looks at those vacation pictures, the reality that she experienced those memories in no longer exists. I think
Mhm.
that's the key thing. So she experienced that, again, vacation, whatever, based on her understanding of the relationship.
Yeah.
She now realized that relationship she thought she had didn't exist. That
Mhm.
world that she was living in was a false world.
Mhm.
So it's not like she can separate out so easily. Well, okay, yeah, he acted out 3 days after this happened, but that's still a really nice thing. It all crumbles together. And that's why that reality fragmentation idea, I think, is helpful.
Mhm.
It's like everything shatters, or the ink in the water. It's
Yes.
not like, but this water here is still clean.
Right.
So I don't think there's a simple answer there to that
Mhm.
question, but that's what I
Mhm.
fundamentally see, that the reality that she's based her memories and experiences of the relationship on actually doesn't exist anymore. It wasn't real. Even though the events did occur
Mhm.
literally. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's hard to explain, but hopefully that makes some sense.
That really helps, but in that word that you use, this shattering, it really is shattered. The
Yeah.
world as you knew it, your life as you knew it, when you discover that basement, or just discover the existence of the basement, because I know discovery is such a process in and of itself, but right then, as soon as you're made aware of that, it's a shattering. And I think it gets really confusing because I think a lot of women will ask their husbands, like, was any of this real? And they'll say, yes, of course. Like, you matter so much to me. Our life, everything on the upstairs matters so much to me. And that's really confusing, obviously, because it's like, well, if this mattered so much, then why wouldn't you have treasured it and taken care of it? But I think that sometimes too, that, that trap door into the basement, it's like it's impenetrable. That compartment, it really is this separate compartment that somebody has been able to deceptively create. And so I think somebody with the basement really still believes and feels everything above ground
Yeah.
was very real, you know? But of course, she didn't have the full picture. It's like looking at a photograph and then zooming out of the photograph, and there's like a whole, I don't know, like a war happening behind you. And you're like, I thought we were at Disneyland or something. Like, I thought we were in a completely different place when all of this was happening. So yes, you still experienced that and lived through it, but the zoomed out picture is now showing something completely life altering, and maybe you would have made very different decisions to that point had you been aware of it. Um, but I think
Yeah.
the thing that's like maybe helpful about knowing that is just for the person who is betrayed of that gives you hopefully more power to stay present with her in her pain too, to be able to see the significance of the injury and to see the wreckage of that village that you bombed, right? So I don't know if you have any other thoughts there, Chris.
I think you mentioned compartmentalization. I think that's such a huge part of this because one of the common versions of this conversation will be, you obviously never loved me. You never cared about me.
Yeah.
And he will say, of course I loved you.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, vast majority of cases, he's telling the truth. Like
Mm-hmm.
he genuinely felt, experienced love for the partner, the relationship still. Not in all cases, of course, but
Sure.
generally speaking,
Yes.
in my experience, a guy is telling the truth when he makes that statement. And then to the partner, it's, how could you possibly have loved me and done that thing? It just doesn't make sense. And that can bring up so much anger. How can you sit there with a straight face and tell me that you loved me when you were doing these unloving things?
Yeah.
And the problem is with the basement, there's all sorts of psychological reasons for this, but the internal justification, rationalizing, all guys do it, and all this stuff that kind of goes on, or it's not that bad, or maybe
Yeah.
for some guys, it's like, well, it's just porn. I'm not actually doing this. There's all sorts of things that might come up.
Yeah.
And over time, unfortunately, it becomes easier and easier. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the key thing. The compartments become more secure, more separated. So something I maybe felt really guilty about the first time I did it, the more I did it, it becomes just what I do. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's so compartmentalized and separated from the relationship that
Mm-hmm.
maybe I don't experience an internal conflict between, I love my partner, I love my family, and I do this thing over here.
Yeah.
Whereas again, for a partner who is, we're assuming a lot more integrated because they're
Mm-hmm.
not living this split reality,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost unfathomable to think that you could be doing, like, I couldn't be having an affair here and then telling you I love you here and doing these things. Like, it just doesn't compute. Whereas for a guy that's maybe been doing it for a long time, unfortunately, it often becomes, dare I say, almost quite comfortable after a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what you do. And I know that in itself might be really triggering to hear, but that's what I experience so often when these guys say, well, of course I loved her the whole time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they really believe it.
Yeah.
Very difficult to work through that in practice, though, as well.
Totally. I think the adjacent piece there is you were going and doing this, whatever the behavior is. Was I not even a thought? Did you not even consider me? Did you not even consider our family, what we built? Like, how was I not even a thought? And I don't know what your experience with this has been, but so often I think the answer to that actually is no, you really weren't a thought. You
Yeah.
really were not. And that equally is so upsetting. And like, you have every right to be upset about that, as the partner. And also, it really speaks to that deceptive compartmentalization piece and the integrity abuse piece, just all of the harm there, right? So would you say
Yeah.
similarly to that, Chris?
Exactly. I could have finished your sentence as you
Yeah.
were saying it. It's the reality more often than not is, yeah, like, how could you do this? How could you choose to betray me out? This assumption that you must have consciously thought about me and chosen to go and do this despite that.
Mhm.
95% of the time, the sad reality is, especially if we're talking about a more compulsive or addictive or
Yeah.
longer term pattern of behavior,
Mhm.
actually, there probably wasn't much thought at all in that
Mhm.
moment. There probably wasn't much guilt, much shame in that moment.
Yeah.
It just became something I do that's compartmentalized and hidden
Mhm.
away. And that's so hard for a partner. This comes up a lot when we do disclosure as well. When
Mhm.
it's like, well, what date did that happen? It's,
Yeah.
well, I don't know. It could have been 2021. It could have been 2022, maybe 2023. And the partner's thinking, how can you possibly not know when
Mhm.
you did this egregious thing?
Yes.
And so I think it's the same kind of thing going on. It became somewhat normal. There wasn't much thought attached, which is so traumatic to hear in its own way, as you're saying.
Mhm. That's an interesting way to think about it too, because I think like our normal stuff, like I don't remember what I ate last Wednesday for breakfast. It was like my normal thing. But if I had some significant traumatic incident or something happen, or maybe even like an exciting thing or whatever, I would remember. I would be able to probably tell you exactly what happened in whatever the situation was, because it would stand out, because it was very different from my regular day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
When that is just something you're doing. And it does make disclosure so hard, and it makes it really hard for spouses and partners to get that accurate information, because he's like, I don't even know how many people, or something, as one example. And it's like, how do you not know that? Surely you would know that. And yet, he doesn't, because it became a really normal part of his reality.
Yeah.
That
And
is,
that's one of the big imbalances, isn't it? Each one of those events to her is a huge, significant betrayal. Each one of those events to him might have just been, if it's, let's say it's an ongoing compulsive porn habit, might have
Mhm.
just been, oh, that's what I tended to do when I was bored during the day. To her, that's a big betrayal moment. To him, it was something that I just did. And huge imbalance there in terms of impact, which, as we're saying again, is a really difficult thing to work through
Mhm.
in the recovery journey, to try and sort of close that back, build his empathy, build his remorse, and close
Mhm.
that imbalance.
Mhm. Yeah, escort services and like prostitution are alive and well in Las Vegas. I'm in Vegas, and but I often think it's interesting, like during a disclosure, somebody will say a certain number that they believe after they've, gone through their accounts and tried to figure out exactly how many. And then maybe a few months later, that number ends up changing. And one of the things I think about is like, and a partner will feel really injured by that. And he might feel like, oh, I mean, it's the same behavior, it's just a different number. But I think about the difference from 0 to 1, 0 prostitutes ever to 1 is significant and substantial. So when your number changes from 9 to 10, it's still significant and it's still substantial, you know? And again, I know it can be hard, and it's a whole process to really try to get that accurate information, but it also really matters because there's more injuries surrounding that too. Anyway.
And there's the question, which certainly is significantly important question for the partner, but as clinicians, we're always trying to root through as well, of almost like, how hard is he working to find that answer as
Yes.
well? Like, if
Yeah.
it's, well, I think it was this many.
Mhm.
If defenses are coming up, which they almost certainly are, we're going to be naturally inclined towards maybe not wanting to see stuff we don't want to see, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yes.
And so I think that's another thing I hear from partners a lot. Like, has he forgotten, or is he just not that desperate to find the true answer? So that's another thing, especially if we're talking about voicing up integrity, accurate reality, those kind of things, being able to name, this is what I did. I'm not quite sure about this, but I'm going to do everything I can to find that answer so I can speak the truth. So even, I know it's a bit of a side point, but even that's important.
Oh, it's really, yeah, totally, really important. Oh, Chris, I'm just so grateful to you coming and chatting, and honestly, just it's been so good to just see you and catch up and hear how you're doing. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and your teaching. I know that this will be really helpful to the people who hear it. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your willingness and all of that. I just appreciate you so, so much.
Yeah, well, I thank you for having me. I thank you for the invite. It was a great excuse to catch up again. And I think the beauty of doing these podcasts, I've done episodes with a few people from our cohort, as you know, is I feel like we could just chat about this for fun anyway, which
Totally.
sounds crazy to say, but I feel like you wouldn't even need to press the record button and we'd probably had a pretty similar conversation. I think we resonate with this model because it speaks to us on a deep level. It's more than just a job, it's a vocational thing. And so to me, it's life-giving to talk to my like-minded people about this kind of thing. So I appreciate the work you're doing, what you're doing for this model, and this podcast, and long may it continue. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all who have joined us and listening. If you have any questions or thoughts, always reach out to me. I am on Instagram at Couch Talkers, and I will also link Chris's information in our show notes so you can find both his website and his podcast, From Harm to Healing. It is so good, you guys. And I appreciate all of you so much. I will see you in our next episode. Bye.